110 degrees. Not air temperature, heat index. That is what the National Weather Service is reporting right now in southern Georgia and along the Florida Panhandle. And the South is not getting a break tonight. Overnight lows are struggling to fall below 80 degrees from Texas to the Carolinas. Your body never recovers. That is not a figure of speech. That is physiology. And it is happening right now, tonight, as this video begins. This is not the same heat wave that hit the country in early July. That one broke power demand records, triggered a federal grid emergency, and killed at least 70 people before it was done. This is something else. Something that came back. And as of this morning, August the 17th, the South is locked inside what the Weather Channel is calling a dangerous, relentless heat wave with staying power, their words, for days across every state from Texas to the Carolinas. Before I go any further, there is something you need to know. My name is Arthur, and you are watching US Weather Threat. If you want to understand what is actually happening to the atmosphere over your home, your city, your state, not just today, but over the next 2 weeks, stay with me through this entire video. Because the most important information I have for you is not in the first 5 minutes. It builds. And by the end, you are going to understand something about this summer that the headline numbers alone will not tell you. My name is Arthur, and this is US Weather Threat. What I'm going to describe over the next 30 minutes is not going to be a one-day story. This is going to keep evolving, and you need to be here when it does. Now, let us talk about what is happening right now. The National Weather Service has issued a heat advisory for all of South Florida today. Miami-Dade County, Broward, Palm Beach, all under alert from 11 in the morning through 7 at night. Afternoon temperatures are expected to peak near 95 to 96 degrees. But with the humidity, and the humidity is crushing right now, the heat index is projected to reach between 105 and 112 degrees. Miami broke a daily temperature record last Thursday that had stood since 1909. It hit 96 degrees, shattering a record that survived over a century. And Tuesday, forecasters say, could match or beat that again. Think about what that means. A record held since 1909. Gone. And the machine that built it is still running. Up the coast, the Florida Panhandle is seeing heat indices already above 105. Pensacola, Tallahassee, Panama City. These are not places known for being comfortable in August, but what they are experiencing right now is beyond the standard August heat. It is hotter than even August standards, and that phrase came directly from this morning's forecast discussion. When a meteorologist says it is hotter than even August standards in the Deep South, you pay attention. Move north and west. Memphis, Tennessee. This city has been in and out of extreme heat warnings for weeks now. As of this morning, heat indices around Memphis are reaching into the upper 100s. The Mid-South corridor, Memphis, Little Rock, Jackson, has been one of the most consistently hammered zones of this entire summer, and the heat index in that region has been flirting with 110 for days. Overnight lows in Memphis have not been dropping below 80 degrees consistently, and that is the detail that turns discomfort into danger. Your home, your apartment, your room, it never cools down. Your body never gets the recovery window it needs. Heat exhaustion becomes a real risk, not because of a single afternoon spike, but because of 48 to 72 consecutive hours of body core stress. Across the southeast, coastal South Carolina is dealing with similar conditions. Heat indices above 105 were recorded this weekend. Charleston, Myrtle Beach, Columbia. This stretch is not supposed to be what it is right now, and what is forecasted for this week only extends those conditions. Let me tell you who is at the most risk in this specific event. Elderly residents without air conditioning are the primary concern. Children left unattended in vehicles, even briefly, are in danger at these temperatures. Outdoor workers, construction crews, agricultural labourers, utility repair workers, all face compounding exposure. But here is the group that does not always get mentioned. People who are low income or housing insecure, without access to cooling. When the city of New Orleans opened cooling centers during the July event, lines formed immediately. That tells you something about what communities are navigating. Do you live in one of the zones I just described? Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to know exactly where you are and what conditions you are feeling. Now here is where this story gets more complex, because this is not just about today. Let me tell you what the models are showing for the next 7 days, and then I want to step back even further and show you the pattern that is actually driving all of this. August the 17th, today, the South is the target. Texas east to Florida, north to the Carolinas. Triple-digit highs and heat indices from 105 to 112 in the worst zones. That is where we are right now. August the 18th, Tuesday. This is the day that forecasters are flagging most intensely. Tuesday could break daily temperature records across multiple locations in Florida. The forecast out of West Palm Beach is calling for 95 to 97 degrees, with some areas potentially tying or breaking all-time records for the date. The NWS Miami advisory language this morning used the phrase dangerously hot conditions. That is not standard August language, that is elevated language. August the 19th, Wednesday. The heat does not break across Texas, it shifts slightly. Houston is looking at highs near 100 degrees. Dallas continues in the upper 90s. The Gulf Coast is not getting relief. And here is the detail that concerns me most about Wednesday. The overnight low forecast for Houston is near 81 degrees. That is an overnight low, 81. That means air conditioners do not cycle off. Demand stays near peak, and power demand at sustained peak is what stresses the grid. Now, I need to stop here for a moment and talk about something that happened this summer that you need to understand. Because it is not just background context, it is directly relevant to where things are heading. In early July, during the first major peak of this summer's heat dome, the United States Department of Energy declared a formal energy emergency. The PJM grid operator, the largest power grid in the country, serving approximately 65 million customers across Delaware, Michigan, Maryland, Kentucky, New Jersey, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia, was ordered to take emergency action to prevent blackouts. Peak demand that Thursday, July the 2nd, was forecast at 166,304 megawatts. That shattered a record that had stood since 2006. 20 years. Gone in one afternoon. And the emergency order directed curtailment of data centers, non-critical industrial facilities, and backup generator users, all to keep hospitals and emergency services from losing power. Then it happened again. In late July, the Southwest Power Pool, covering 17 states across the central US, triggered its own backup generator authorization. Arizona, Arkansas, Colorado, Iowa, Kansas, Louisiana, Minnesota, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, New Mexico, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Texas, Utah, and Wyoming. All of them on a hair trigger. One step away from rolling blackouts. And this week, the heat is back in the south and southeast. So when I tell you what I am about to tell you about the 7-day and 14-day outlook, keep that grid context in your mind. Because the infrastructure that is supposed to protect you from this heat is already wounded from 2 months of fighting it. August the 20th, Thursday. Models are showing a slight ridge wobble. Some areas in the western half of the country may see a degree or two of temperature moderation. But across the southeast and into the Carolinas, this is not a relief day. Highs remain in the mid-90s for Raleigh, Charlotte and Columbia, South Carolina. Heat indices stay above 100. August the 21st, Friday. The latest GFS run this morning is keeping the ridge anchored. There is no strong cold frontal passage on the horizon. The blocking pattern overhead is remarkably persistent, and I want to explain why in a moment, because the mechanism behind this is more interesting and more alarming than the temperatures themselves. August the 22nd, Saturday. The ridge axis may try to nudge westward. If it does, that could allow some increase in shower and storm activity across parts of the southeast. But these storms would not represent the heat wave breaking. They would represent moisture working the edges of the system. Temperatures could briefly dip a degree or two before rebounding. August the 23rd, Sunday. Ensemble data is showing some disagreement beyond this point. Both the GFS and the European ensembles are depicting the high-pressure system as durable, but the European ensemble has been nudging toward a slightly more eastward position, which could open the door for a brief trough passage during the last week of August. I am not ready to call that relief. I am watching it. Here is the thing about 7-day outlooks during a pattern like this one. Every day the forecast shifts slightly. The ridge holds slightly longer than models predicted the week before. That has been the story of the entire summer of 2026. The high-pressure systems have outlasted their initial forecast windows consistently, and that trend is worth factoring into how you plan. Now, let me step all the way back, because I want to show you the architecture of what is happening here. This summer's heatwave did not come from nowhere. It has roots in atmospheric patterns that were visible months ago, and understanding those patterns is the only way to understand why this is not over. The 2026 North American heatwave, which is still ongoing as of today, began as a dome of high pressure centered over the eastern United States in late June. That first dome persisted through the 4th of July, produced the grid emergency I described, caused at least 70 confirmed deaths, and peaked at 106 degrees in Atlantic City, New Jersey, on July the 4th. The second dome formed over the western half of the continent through late July. Salt Lake City hit 109 degrees. Washington state declared a state of emergency as wildfires burned across more than 312 square miles in 12 large fires simultaneously. The Roe Creek complex in eastern Oregon alone grew past 490 square miles. And now this, August, the third significant episode. What is sustaining this? The answer involves something called an omega-block, and I use that term carefully because it is not a guess. It is what the atmospheric data is showing. An omega-block is a pattern in the upper atmosphere where high pressure becomes sandwiched between two areas of low pressure, creating a shape that resembles the Greek letter omega. When that configuration locks in, it can resist movement for days, sometimes weeks. The jet stream, which would normally push weather systems through, gets rerouted around the block. Instead of breaking the heat, it just carries it around the edges. The omega block is also being reinforced this summer by sea surface temperature anomalies in the Gulf waters. The Gulf waters are running significantly above average. Warm ocean water feeds moisture and energy back into the atmosphere above it. When that warmth rises and encounters the overhead ridge, it does not generate storm-breaking convection the way you might hope. Instead, it feeds the ridge. The heat dome becomes self-sustaining through a feedback loop, and underneath this ridge, the land itself has become an amplifier. 45% of the lower 48 states were still in some form of drought as of late July, according to the latest USDA and NOAA data. Dry soil does not evaporate water. When the sun hits dry soil, nearly all of that solar energy converts directly to heat. Wet soil distributes that energy into water vapor, which cools the surface slightly. In a drought, that buffer is gone. The land just heats up, and the air above it heats with it. That feedback loop, warm Gulf, dry land, omega block aloft, is the engine behind what you are experiencing right now. The wildfires burning across the West are part of the same equation. More than 4.5 million acres burned across the United States as of early August. That is 130% of the 10-year average. And wildfires do more than destroy land. They inject smoke particulates into the atmosphere, which can actually trap heat near the surface by absorbing infrared radiation. This is a subtle effect, but during sustained blocking patterns it is real, and the smoke from Canada's wildfire season, which has now consumed more than 9 million acres, has at points drifted into the continental US and added to the thermal blanket overhead. I want to ask you something. Have you ever seen a summer that felt this relentless? Where you thought the heat was finally breaking and then it came right back? Comment below with your location and tell me whether this summer has felt different to you, because I am hearing from viewers across the country who say yes, and the data backs them up. Let me now talk about one specific mechanism that is going to determine how the next 2 to 3 weeks unfold. Because this is not just about the current heat wave. There is a transition coming, but it is not the transition most people are hoping for. The latest ensemble models, both the American GFS and the European, are suggesting that the ridge currently dominating the south and southeast will gradually try to shift westward as we approach the final week of August. If that shift happens on schedule, the storm track would begin to reorganize across the Central Plains and Midwest. That could mean more organized severe weather threat to states like Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa during the last week of August and into early September. But, and this is critical, a westward shift of the ridge does not mean relief for the south. It may mean more moisture flow around the western edge of the ridge, which could actually increase the humidity component of the heat, even as the air temperatures fluctuate. Heat indices in the Gulf Coast states could remain dangerous through early September, even as the pattern tries to evolve. I've been doing weather analysis for years. This summer ranks among the most sustained and geographically broad heat events I have seen. The combination of multi-dome sequencing, grid stress, wildfire amplification, drought feedback, and the Gulf moisture engine operating simultaneously is not something that resolves cleanly. It fades at the edges and reforms at the core. Now I want to come back to something concrete before I close this video, because I do not want you to leave here without specific action items based on the forecast. If you are in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, South Carolina, or North Carolina, this week is not the week to take risks with outdoor exposure. Heat illness does not announce itself. By the time you feel seriously impaired, your core temperature may already be dangerously elevated. The difference between heat exhaustion and heat stroke is a matter of minutes. Heat exhaustion is recoverable. Heat stroke is a medical emergency with a high fatality rate. Check on elderly neighbours and relatives this week. If they do not have working air conditioning, that is an emergency level concern right now, not a minor inconvenience, an emergency. If you have a health condition, if you take medications that affect how your body regulates temperature, beta blockers, diuretics, antihistamines, antidepressants, talk to your doctor now. These medications can significantly impair your body's ability to cool itself, and your risk profile during an event like this is much higher than someone without those factors. If your power goes out during this event, find a public cooling space immediately. Do not wait for 2 or 3 hours to see if power returns. The temperature inside a home or apartment rises rapidly when the air conditioning is off during extreme heat, and the risk compounds hour by hour. The grid is stressed. That is not alarmism. That is what happened twice this summer already, and the conditions this week in the south are close to the same parameters that triggered those events. Have a plan. Tomorrow I am going to be watching the overnight low temperatures from Houston east to Atlanta very closely. If those lows stay above 80 degrees on consecutive nights, that is the signal that the body stress accumulation is entering the danger zone for vulnerable populations. I will have an update for you. I also have something I need to look at regarding an atmospheric feature that the latest model runs are beginning to highlight for very late August. Something in the Western Caribbean that the ensembles are starting to watch. I am not ready to talk specifics yet because the data is too early, but it is on my radar and I will be reporting on it before the end of this week. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss that update. Like this video if it helped you understand what is happening. Share it with someone in the South right now, because the information in this video could matter more this week than most things on their social media feed. This summer has already tested this country in ways that will be studied for years. 70 deaths, 2 federal grid emergencies, nearly 5 million acres of wildfire, and record heat indices in cities from New Jersey to Miami. And we are not done. August is not done. The ridge is not done. Tomorrow I am watching. You should be too. Let me go deeper on the physiology. Because I think most people understand intellectually that heat is dangerous, but they do not understand what is actually happening inside the human body during an event like this. And understanding it changes how seriously you take the forecast. Your body is a heat management system. Everything it does, digesting food, thinking, breathing, moving, generates heat as a byproduct. At rest, a human body generates about 80 watts of heat. That is roughly the same as an old incandescent light bulb. During physical activity, that number climbs to 500 watts or more. Your body has to get rid of all of that heat continuously, or your core temperature rises, and when your core temperature rises past a critical threshold, your organs begin to fail. The primary mechanism your body uses to expel heat is sweating. When sweat evaporates from your skin, it carries heat away with it. That process works well in dry heat. In humid heat, it breaks down. When the relative humidity is high, the air is already saturated with water vapor, and your sweat cannot evaporate efficiently. Instead of cooling you, it just drips off your skin. Your body senses that it is not cooling down, so it sends even more blood to the skin surface and produces even more sweat. Your cardiovascular system has to work harder. Your kidneys start to strain. And if the process continues without intervention, you move from heat exhaustion, which is recoverable, to heat stroke, which damages the brain, liver, and kidneys and can kill in under an hour. Here is why nighttime matters so much in this specific event. When overnight lows stay above 80 degrees, your body does not get the recovery window it needs. Even if you are inside with air conditioning, your air conditioner is working against an 80-degree baseline rather than a 60-degree baseline. It works harder, uses more energy and, critically for people with older or less efficient systems, may not be able to keep the interior temperature at a safe level. Research on heatwave mortality consistently shows that the second and third nights of a sustained heat event are when the most deaths occur, not the first day, because the accumulated body stress has nowhere to drain. In southern Georgia right now, coastal South Carolina, the Florida Panhandle, Memphis, the overnight lows are not giving people that recovery window. This is not a one-day event. It is a sustained physiological siege. Now let me shift to infrastructure. Because the human body is not the only system under stress here, the road network is already being affected. During the July heat event, the Illinois Department of Transportation issued warnings about pavement buckling due to the heat. Asphalt softens at high temperatures, and in extreme cases, concrete slabs expand against each other and buckle upward. When overnight temperatures stay elevated, the pavement does not contract and cool, which means it enters the next day's heat already stressed. State highway agencies in Texas and Louisiana monitor for this routinely during summer, but extended events push road materials beyond their design tolerance. Amtrak slowed train speeds in the Northeast Corridor during the July event because rail lines expand in extreme heat and can develop stress fractures or alignment issues. If this current event extends and intensifies toward the eastern seaboard, similar precautions may be taken again. Water systems face compounding stress. Elevated temperatures increase water consumption dramatically across urban areas, filling pools, running sprinklers, cooling towers at industrial facilities, hospital cooling systems. Municipal water supply and delivery infrastructure was not designed for the kind of simultaneous peak demand that occurs during multi-week heat events. Some smaller municipalities in Texas have issued voluntary conservation requests this summer when reservoir levels dropped below comfortable operational thresholds. Agriculture across the South is taking damage that will not show up in the headline temperature numbers, but will show up in food prices later this year. Corn, that is in its reproductive stage, pollination, grain fill, is vulnerable to heat above 95 degrees. Cotton bolls can drop in extreme heat. Livestock experience heat stress at temperatures that seem moderate to humans, and cattle in particular require shade, high-volume watering, and reduced crowding during events like this. Hog operations, which generate enormous amounts of internal animal heat, face compound pressure when exterior temperatures remove the temperature differential that ventilation systems rely on. The agricultural impact of this summer is going to be measurable and lasting. I think that story has not been covered adequately, and I plan to do a deeper breakdown on it before the end of August. Let me now take you to something I've been watching in the atmospheric data that I have not seen covered widely. It involves the jet stream position and what it means not just for the heat, but for the storm track heading into September. The jet stream this summer has been in what I can only describe as a severely constricted northern position. The polar jet, which normally tracks across the continental United States from west to east, has been shunted so far north that it has barely interacted with the heat dome systems in any meaningful way. When the jet is that far north, it cannot deliver the cold air intrusions that would normally undercut a heat dome from the north. The ridge just sits there, like a lid on a pot. Now that northern jet position is connected to something larger. The Arctic has experienced warmer than average temperatures across multiple consecutive months. When the temperature contrast between the equator and the poles decreases, the jet stream weakens and becomes more susceptible to these persistent blocking patterns. It is a feedback that atmospheric scientists have been tracking for years, and what we are living through this summer is one of the clearest expressions of it that has been observed over a multiple-month period. Here is what concerns me about September. When the jet stream finally does begin to amplify and push southward, which it will, because that is the seasonal progression as the northern hemisphere tilts away from the sun, the thermal contrast between the lingering heat in the south and the advancing cooler air from the north could be significant. That kind of setup is what produces strong, severe weather systems. Large temperature gradients fuel high-level winds and atmospheric instability. Tornado season does not end in June for the Deep South, and the pattern heading into September could be more active than it might otherwise be, precisely because of how extreme the heat has been. I am not forecasting an outbreak. I am saying the conditions have the potential to be favourable for organised convection as we enter the back half of August and push towards September. Watch that space. Now I want to take you to the wildfire picture, because it connects directly to what is happening with the heat and the atmosphere over your head. As of the latest data from the National Interagency Fire Centre, more than 42,000 fires have burned over 4.5 million acres across the United States in 2026. That is 130% of the 10-year average number of fires and 146% of the 10-year average acreage. 146%, nearly half again as much as normal. And 38% of the contiguous United States was still in some category of drought as of late July. Washington state is dealing with active large fires across more than 312 square miles simultaneously. Eastern Oregon's Roe Creek complex has burned to 490 square miles. Canada's fire season has consumed over 9 million acres. These are not small, isolated events. These are continent-scale processes running simultaneously. The smoke from these fires has had a measurable impact on air quality, from Minnesota to the Great Lakes to the Northeast. During late July and into early August, the Wikipedia record of this heatwave noted that smoke from the 2026 Canadian wildfires reduced heating intensity at the surface over parts of the Northeast on certain days. Smoke can both reflect solar radiation and absorb infrared. The net effect depends on the smoke layer height and composition, but both mechanisms can alter surface temperatures and complicate the forecast. What I find particularly notable about the fire picture is the relationship between drought and fire and heat. These three things are not separate phenomena, they are a system. Drought dries vegetation. Dry vegetation burns more easily and more intensely. Fire destroys the ground cover that would otherwise retain soil moisture. The exposed bare soil then heats even more in subsequent heat events, and the atmospheric carbon from the fires adds to the greenhouse layer that slows overnight cooling. It is circular, it is self-reinforcing, and it is playing out right now across a significant portion of the continent. Earlier in this video, I asked you whether this summer has felt different. Let me give you some context for why your intuition might be correct. The 2026 North American heatwave, as it is now being documented, began in late June and has produced events in three distinct clusters: the initial East Coast and Central Dome in late June through early July, the Western Dome in mid to late July, and this current Southern Persistence event in mid-August. At the peak of the first event, 160 million people across 30 states were under heat alerts simultaneously. 70 deaths were confirmed through early August, with that count expected to rise as post-event analysis continues. The power demand record on the PJM grid, which had held since 2006, was broken. A federal energy emergency was declared. By any measure, geographic scope, duration, human impact, infrastructure stress. This is one of the most significant heat events in modern American history. And the third episode is happening right now. Let me now look at what the models are showing for the week of August 24th through the 31st. Because I want to give you as complete a picture as I can, while being honest about where the uncertainty lives. The GFS ensemble from this morning's run shows the high-pressure ridge beginning to weaken slightly over the Great Plains around August 24th or 25th. There is some suggestion of a trough trying to dig southward from Canada in that time frame. If that happens, it could deliver a brief moderation to parts of the Midwest, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa. But the southern states, particularly the Gulf Coast, may remain warm and humid even during that intrusion. Cold fronts tend to stall before they push all the way to the Gulf Coast in late summer. The Gulf moisture fights back against the drier air, and you end up with a zone of active storms rather than clean relief. The European model this morning was slightly more aggressive with that trough. The European ensemble is showing a deeper dip in the jet stream over the eastern two-thirds of the country around the 26th or 27th. If that verifies, there could be more widespread temperature relief during the final days of August. But I want to be clear, both models have struggled with the precise timing of pattern changes this summer. The heat has consistently outlasted the forecast window. I'm not going to call the end of this event until I see clearer model consensus. What I am more confident about is the last week of August and the first week of September across the Central Plains and Midwest. If the trough I just described does materialize, it will be interacting with Gulf moisture from the south and residual warmth from the recent heat event. That combination, combined with the jet stream forcing overhead, could produce significant organized convection across Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, and Iowa. Possibly strong, possibly severe. I will be watching this closely and reporting back. There is another element I want to bring into this forecast discussion, because there is a question I have been getting from viewers all summer, and I want to address it directly. People ask, is El Niño making this worse? And the honest answer is complicated. El Niño is a pattern of warming in the central and eastern tropical Pacific Ocean. When El Niño conditions are present, they influence the position and strength of the subtropical jet stream. They tend to suppress hurricane activity in the Atlantic basin by increasing wind shear, but they also tend to warm winter temperatures across the northern tier and can influence summer patterns in ways that are less well understood than the winter teleconnections. The current El Niño signal is real. The Niño 3.4 index has been running positive this summer, approaching what would be considered moderate El Niño status, and its influence on the subtropical jet, increasing moisture transport from the Pacific and the Gulf into the southern tier, has been evident in the persistent Gulf moisture feeding this summer's heat events. The warm Gulf waters that I described earlier as an energy source for the ridge, El Niño plays a role in keeping those waters warm. But El Niño is not the whole explanation. The persistence of this heat, the northward constriction of the jet stream, the multi-dome blocking pattern, these are features that are operating within the El Niño background, but are not fully explained by it. The atmosphere this summer has taken every favourable input and amplified it. That is the honest summary. One more thing before I close this video. There is an area in the Western Caribbean that the latest model runs are beginning to generate some interest around for very late August and into September. I mentioned it briefly earlier, and I want to come back to it now. I am not going to give you a specific track or a specific probability because the data is too preliminary and I will not mislead you with false precision. But I am seeing some ensemble members beginning to highlight the possibility of a disturbance in that region as the pattern evolves through the back half of August. The Gulf waters are very warm. The shear environment across the Gulf could be more favourable if the ridge shifts west, as some models suggest. I am watching this. I will have more to say about it by the end of the week, and if anything in the model guidance sharpens this signal, I will do a dedicated video. What I want you to understand is that the heat wave and the tropical question are not separate stories. They are connected by the same atmospheric pattern. A westward shifting ridge is exactly the kind of configuration that could both moderate the southern heat slightly and open a path for something to develop in the Gulf Basin. These things happen together. They are driven by the same mechanisms. Keep that in mind as this week unfolds. I want to close with something that I think is important to say out loud. 70 confirmed deaths. 160 million people under heat alerts at the peak. Power demand records broken. Federal grid emergencies. Firefighters killed in wildfires. Farmers watching their crops stress. Elderly people in hot apartments. Infrastructure buckling. And the summer is not over. This is not a normal heat season. If it feels different to you, it is because it is different. The data says so. The records say so. And the people who have lost someone to this heat, they know. Tomorrow I am watching the overnight lows in the south very closely. I am watching the trough signal in the long-range models, and I am watching that Western Caribbean. If you want to be here when I report back, US weather threat is where you will find it. This is the kind of information that matters most when the pattern is still moving. Have a plan for this week. Check on the people around you who are vulnerable. Do not underestimate what the heat index of 110 degrees does to the human body over consecutive days. This is the most dangerous heat event of the summer of 2026. And as of right now, it is not finished. I want to circle back to something I touched on earlier and go deeper. Because the electricity grid story this summer is one of the most underreported aspects of what is happening, and I think it deserves more than a passing mention. The PJM interconnection grid serves approximately 65 million customers. Its territory covers the eastern third of the country, from the mid-Atlantic states through the Ohio Valley and into parts of the South. When the Department of Energy declared an energy emergency on July the 1st, the directive was to prevent the grid from entering what is called a Level 3 Energy Emergency Alert. That is the level at which rolling blackouts become the tool of last resort to prevent a total grid collapse. PJM did not get there, but it was close enough that federal intervention was deemed necessary. Here is what that tells you. The country's largest grid operator, running on infrastructure built and expanded over decades, with backup systems and redundancy protocols, came within one escalation level of rolling blackouts under the stress of a heat event. And that was during the first major peak. The second peak, in late July, triggered a separate emergency order covering 17 states under the Southwest Power Pool. 2 separate grid systems, 2 separate emergency declarations, 1 summer. The AI data center growth factor is worth mentioning here because it is rarely discussed in heatwave coverage. Energy consumption from data centers in the United States has grown significantly over the past 3 years as AI infrastructure has expanded. These facilities consume enormous amounts of electricity for both computing and cooling. The emergency order in July specifically directed PJM to curtail power to data centers that had backup generators, essentially telling them to switch to their own diesel generators to take pressure off the shared grid. That is an unusual step. It tells you that the margin between available supply and peak demand has narrowed to a point where every major consumer matters. The implication for future heat events is real. As electricity demand from AI infrastructure continues to grow, and as climate-driven heat events require more residential and commercial cooling, the competition for grid capacity during extreme events is only going to intensify. This week, with the South back in triple digits, that competition is happening again. Quietly. Without the high-profile emergency declaration headline, but the physics are the same. Now I want to talk about something that rarely gets discussed in weather video content, and that is the equity dimension of extreme heat. Because extreme heat does not hit everyone the same way, not even close. Heat mortality in the United States is not randomly distributed. It tracks along lines of income, age, access to cooling, housing type, and neighborhood characteristics. Older urban neighborhoods without tree canopy coverage, where asphalt and concrete absorb and radiate heat rather than shade and cool, experience what is called the urban heat island effect. Air temperatures in these neighborhoods can be 5 to 10 degrees higher than nearby suburban or green areas during the same heat event. 5 to 10 degrees. That is the difference between manageable and dangerous. People living in poorly insulated older housing stock without central air conditioning face compound risk. A poorly insulated apartment can trap heat and continue warming through the night, even as exterior temperatures marginally drop. By morning, interior temperatures may be higher than they were the previous afternoon. People in these situations are making impossible decisions, run a window unit that pushes their electricity bill toward a threshold they cannot afford, or endure the heat. This is real. It is happening right now in Memphis, in Houston, in Birmingham, in Charleston. This is also why cooling center access matters so much, and why the opening of cooling centers during this event should be tracked the same way we track the temperature forecast. If you live near someone who does not have reliable cooling, that is information that can save a life this week. Not metaphorically, literally. Now let me bring the full picture together, because I have covered a lot of ground in this video, and I want to make sure you leave with a clear summary. What we know as of August the 17th, 2026. The South is locked in the most dangerous sustained heat event of the summer. Heat indices above 110 in multiple states. Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties under NWS heat advisory today. Miami broke a record last Thursday that dated to 1909. The Florida Panhandle, southern Georgia, coastal South Carolina, the Memphis corridor, Houston, and Dallas are all under significant heat pressure. Overnight lows refusing to fall below 80 degrees in the worst zones. What the models show for this week? No clean break in the pattern. Tuesday flagged by forecasters as a record-breaking temperature day for parts of Florida. The ridge persists. Grid stress continues. The pattern could begin to evolve around August 24th or 25th, with a potential trough, but timing is uncertain, and southern relief may lag northern moderation by several days. What the longer context tells us. This is the third significant episode of the 2026 heatwave. 70 confirmed deaths through early August, 2 federal energy emergencies, 4.5 million wildfire acres, 45% drought coverage, and an atmospheric blocking pattern that has consistently outlasted model predictions this summer. What to do right now? Check on vulnerable people in your life. Know where your nearest cooling centre is. Have a power outage plan. If you work outdoors, talk to your supervisor about heat safety protocols. Take the overnight temperatures as seriously as the afternoon highs. And stay connected here at US Weather Threat, because this story is still unfolding, and I will be here every day it does. Tomorrow, I will be watching the overnight low in Houston. I will be watching the first Caribbean model signals more closely, and I will have updated GFS and European ensemble analysis on the late August pattern transition. Thank you for being here. Stay safe out there, because right now, the heat is not abstract. It is outside your door. Before I sign off, I want to pull the lens back one final time and put this summer in a historical frame. Not to alarm you, not to be dramatic, but because context is how we understand what we are in the middle of. The 2024 North American heatwave killed over 1,000 people in the United States alone. Phoenix, that year, saw 664 deaths linked to heat illness. Las Vegas saw 342. Those were the records that stood going into this summer. As of early August 2026, the confirmed death toll from this summer's heatwave was 70, with the accounting still incomplete. The events are still active. The final toll is still being compiled. Extreme heat kills more Americans per year than any other weather-related hazard. More than hurricanes, more than floods, more than tornadoes. About 1,300 per year on average, according to the Centers for Disease Control. But that figure is a long-run average, and it is widely believed to be an undercount, because heat-related illness as a contributing cause of death is inconsistently reported across hospital systems and coroner offices. The true toll is likely higher. What makes this summer distinct is not just the temperatures, it is the sequence. Event after event with insufficient recovery time in between. The same regions hit twice, the grid stressed twice. And now, in August, when we might expect the atmosphere to be showing the first hesitant signs of seasonal change, the South is enduring what the forecast models are describing as its most intense episode yet. Meteorological summer ends on August the 31st. We are 2 weeks from that marker, but atmospheric heat does not follow a calendar. The same pattern that has driven this summer can persist well into September. And the memory of the heat, the elevated ocean temperatures, the dried soil, the depleted water reserves, those linger even after the ridge weakens. Recovery from a summer like this is measured in months, not days. I do not say any of this to make you feel helpless. I say it because the people who are most prepared for what a forecast like this means are the ones who understand it most clearly. You are that person if you watched this far. You know what the heat index of 110 means to a body without recovery overnight. You know why the grid is stressed. You know why the wildfires are burning more than they used to. You know what the omega block is and why it matters. That knowledge is not just interesting, it is protective. Share this video. Tell someone in the South what is in it. Because weather information is only useful if it reaches the people who need it in time to act on it. I am Arthur. This is US Weather Threat. Tomorrow I will be back with updated models, updated grid conditions, and whatever the Caribbean is starting to show. Until then, watch the heat index, check your cooling, look in on your neighbours, and remember that the record that Miami broke last Thursday had stood since 1909. That is how different this summer is. Stay with me.